Friedrich Nietzsche didn't believe fear was the enemy. He believed fear was the test, the compass, the revealer of what you must face if you ever want to become something greater. He wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." Not as a motivational quote, but as a confrontation. Because the part of you that survives must be forced to evolve. And it never evolves in comfort. Most people don't live small because they lack ambition. They live small because they avoid the one thing that would change everything: fear. Not the fear of death, the fear of truth, the fear of judgment, the fear of being seen for who you really are. And if that sentence stings, if you're tired of letting fear define your ceiling, subscribe now. Because what comes next won't coddle you. It'll challenge you. Nietzsche called this the path of becoming. He didn't promise it would be painless. He promised it would be worth it. Because to confront fear is to confront your false self. The self that performs. The self that conforms. The self that avoids conflict, hides behind excuses, and tells you you're not ready yet. But readiness is a myth. Fear won't go away before the leap. It dies in the middle of it. It dies when you do the thing anyway. When you speak the truth anyway. When you burn the script and walk into the unknown anyway. That's how strength is earned. Not by outthinking fear, but by outliving it. The question is, are you willing to do that? Or will you keep negotiating with fear, hoping one day it will politely let you go? Fear doesn't always show up as panic. Sometimes it shows up as politeness, as overthinking, as hesitation masked by rationality. It pretends to be strategy. It hides behind phrases like just being smart or waiting for the right time. Nietzsche saw this clearly in people who called themselves disciplined or moral, but in truth were just afraid. Afraid of their own power, afraid of stepping outside what they knew, afraid of becoming fully responsible for their own existence. He believed that fear, if not confronted directly, doesn't disappear. It mutates. It becomes self-deception. You don't call it fear anymore. You call it wisdom. You say you're being patient, mature, humble. But what you're really doing is waiting, hoping the moment will come where you no longer feel uncomfortable. And that moment never arrives. Instead, you build your life around avoidance, around managing your fear instead of defeating it. And slowly, your identity becomes a cage built from good intentions and unspoken anxieties. Nietzsche's antidote was simple but brutal. Radical honesty. Not just with the world, but with yourself. Brutal, unflinching self-awareness. Ask yourself, what are you avoiding right now? What conversation have you been rehearsing but not having? What decision keeps returning to your mind, only for you to push it aside again and again? That's not a coincidence. That's your fear trying to go unnoticed. And it's exactly where your potential is buried. This isn't theoretical. It's practical. The people who grow, who rise, who become unshakable, they don't do it by eliminating fear. They do it by locating it, naming it, and moving through it anyway. Courage, to Nietzsche, wasn't something you perform. It wasn't a speech or a pose. It was the moment, often quiet and invisible, when you admit to yourself, I've been hiding. And instead of judging yourself, you do something terrifying. You stop. You stop lying. Stop waiting. Stop pretending that fear is a sign to hold back instead of a signal to lean in. And from that stillness, you begin again, not with bravado, but with clarity. Not because you've destroyed your fear, but because you've stopped letting it make your decisions for you. That's courage. That's confrontation. And that's where transformation begins. Fear is clever. It doesn't show up with sirens. It disguises itself as logic, patience, humility. It tells you to wait a little longer, prepare a little more, be more careful. And the problem is, it sounds wise. But Nietzsche warned us. Most wisdom is just fear dressed up in flattering language. He said, "The snake which cannot cast its skin must die." That's what fear does. It convinces you to keep the skin that's already suffocating you. It tells you that comfort is safety, that predictability is peace. But here's the brutal truth. Comfort zones don't keep you safe. They keep you small. They keep you numb. They keep you exactly where your potential rots quietly in the background. And the longer you stay there, the more you forget what you were capable of. You stop dreaming. You stop challenging. You start calling fear maturity and stagnation stability. Nietzsche called this the herd mindset, where people trade their will to power for a false sense of belonging. They would rather blend in than burn bright, because burning bright makes you a target. But if you want to become what Nietzsche called the Übermensch, the higher self, you can't carry fear with you. You have to confront it, strip it of its disguise, and realize that most of what you've been calling reasons are just well-rehearsed justifications for staying small. You don't need more time. You need more truth. And the truth is, fear doesn't leave quietly. You have to outgrow it, outlast it, and outwalk it every single day. That's the cost of becoming. Fear doesn't just make you small, it makes you obedient. That's what Nietzsche saw. He understood that fear wasn't just a feeling, it was a system. A quiet force that trains you to shrink, to nod, to hesitate. And over time, you start calling that fear by other names. Patience, humility, morality, realism. But it's none of those things. It's fear, disguised as virtue. This is how fear survives. It convinces you that safety is wisdom, that silence is maturity, that mediocrity is kindness. But Nietzsche warned that this lie is the beginning of decay. He called it slave morality, the mindset that glorifies weakness, submission, and victimhood. The kind of morality that keeps people tame, predictable, and easy to rule. You were not born to be ruled, but fear keeps you in line. It whispers, "Don't stand out. Don't speak too loudly. Don't risk their judgment." And you obey, thinking you're being responsible, thinking you're being smart. But really, you're betraying the part of you that was built to lead, to create, to command. The real danger isn't that fear exists. It's that you've made peace with it. You've accepted it as normal. And in doing so, you've abandoned the path Nietzsche demanded we take. The path toward power, self-overcoming, and radical freedom. And here's the hardest truth. If you don't challenge fear, you will serve it. Not once, not temporarily, but for your entire life. Nietzsche believed that most people are not suffering because they are weak. They are suffering because they're dishonest, not with others, with themselves. They lie about what they want. They lie about what they feel. They lie about what they're afraid of. And they do it so often that they forget it's even a lie. This dishonesty is subtle. It hides in compromise. It wears the mask of humility. You tell yourself you're being realistic, mature, polite. But deep down, you're just avoiding a war, a necessary one. The war between who you are and who you were trained to be. Fear thrives in silence. It thrives in polite obedience. It convinces you that tension is dangerous, that saying what you really think will ruin everything. But Nietzsche saw this kind of life for what it was: decay. He believed that the man who refuses to speak his truth, even when it costs him, is already half dead. So ask yourself, Where are you still lying? Where are you still pretending? What part of you is still playing small because it's easier than facing the consequences of being real? Confronting fear isn't always about courage. Sometimes it's about exhaustion, about being done with the performance, done with the guilt, done with the self-abandonment. And when you reach that point, when your honesty becomes more important than your comfort, you don't need motivation. You need direction. And that's when everything changes. The fear that keeps you small doesn't scream. It whispers. It's subtle. It shows up in your hesitation to speak, your silence when you want to act, your decision to shrink in moments that demand expansion. It tells you to wait. Not forever, just long enough to forget what you were chasing. It tells you not to upset anyone, not to make waves, not to risk being misunderstood. And it always makes the same promise. Your moment will come, as long as you stay quiet, stay agreeable, stay in line. Nietzsche saw that voice for what it really is. Not caution, but sedation. A slow, quiet death dressed up as reason. To Nietzsche, the great tragedy of life wasn't violence or hardship. It was paralysis, the decay of potential through comfort. He believed most people didn't die from too much chaos. They died from too little confrontation. They didn't fail because they aimed too high, but because they never took the shot. Not because they were incapable, but because they were afraid. Because it's not the giant obstacle that breaks you. It's the years spent negotiating with fear, the daily surrender of your courage in exchange for a fragile sense of safety, the slow bleeding out of your passion because you didn't want to be judged. This is what Nietzsche meant when he warned us about herd morality, a culture of smallness disguised as virtue. The psychological tendency to value comfort, stability, and sameness over truth, freedom, and individual will. Herd morality doesn't ask you to be excellent. It asks you to be inoffensive. It rewards fear. It praises passivity. It teaches you that being tolerated is more important than being true. And if you go along with it long enough, the real you, the dangerous, honest, powerful self, gets buried under layers of politeness and self-censorship. You weren't meant to live like that. You weren't born to repeat someone else's script. You weren't designed to dim your fire just to blend in. Fear wants you tame. Society wants you quiet. But your soul? It wants movement, fire, struggle, not chaos, but meaningful resistance, purpose. The kind of purpose that demands you walk directly into the places that scare you, not once, repeatedly, because that's the only way you grow. Fear will dress itself up as strategy, as kindness, as maturity. But Nietzsche knew better. He knew fear is only useful when it sharpens you, not when it cages you. Most people never learn the difference. They think their fear is keeping them alive, when it's actually keeping them from living. So ask yourself, what part of your life is still shaped by that whispering voice? The voice that says, not yet. Be careful. Don't make it worse. And what would your world look like if you finally told it to shut up? Lit the fire and walked through the door it's been guarding all this time. Fear doesn't just limit what you do. It limits what you see. When you're ruled by it, you don't just avoid risks. You distort reality. You begin to believe that comfort is safety, that compliance is strength, that smallness is noble. Nietzsche saw this self-deception as the real tragedy. Not that people are weak, but that they convince themselves weakness is virtue. This is how fear survives, not as a monster, but as a disguise. It tells you that silence is wisdom, that waiting is maturity, that hiding is strategy. But none of that is true. Silence without purpose is submission. Waiting without movement is decay. Hiding without a plan is death. And Nietzsche's warning was clear. What you don't confront will rule you. To escape this, you must see fear clearly, not as something to be managed, but as something to be burned away. That doesn't mean recklessness. It means clarity. It means knowing what terrifies you and moving toward it with deliberate steps. Not because you're fearless, but because you refuse to be defined by fear. Most people never reach this point. They die comfortable, praised for being reasonable, admired for being polite. But deep down, a part of them knows. They never truly lived. They avoided the one thing that would have transformed them. And that thing was fear. You're not here to stay safe. You're here to grow sharp, to grow bold, to walk toward what the old version of you would never dare touch. That's the only way to change. That's the only way to become real. By now, the fear has shape. It's not abstract anymore. You know its voice. You've seen the damage. You understand its patterns, how it speaks, how it moves, how it waits until you're tired to whisper its doubts again. And now, Nietzsche would ask the question that burns through comfort. Will you transcend it? Or will you find new ways to justify its return? Because fear doesn't always leave in defeat. It adapts. It evolves. It comes back dressed as logic. It disguises itself as responsibility, humility, even wisdom. It says, be careful. Don't risk too much. You've come far enough. Maybe later. But Nietzsche called these voices what they really are: the instincts of the herd, the morality of the average, the quiet death of the individual hidden behind polite words and rational restraint. He believed most people never confront their fear because they've figured out how to coexist with it. They build routines around it. They make compromises that feel like strategy. They call their hesitation maturity. They decorate the cage. And the worst part? They call it peace. They convince themselves that the absence of chaos means they're living well, when in truth, they've simply gone numb. But if you've made it this far, you already know. That's not peace. That's sedation. It's the calm that settles in a body that stopped dreaming. It's the stillness of someone who no longer fights for anything, not because they've found clarity, but because they're afraid to be seen trying and failing. Nietzsche had no respect for that kind of life. He wrote for those who were willing to bleed for their rebirth. He believed the human spirit was meant to be forged, not preserved. The next step isn't about courage, it's about disgust. You have to become so sick of being small, so allergic to mediocrity, that fear loses its grip. Not because it disappeared, but because you've stopped needing its protection. You've seen what a life ruled by fear looks like. Silent, slow, and full of what-ifs. You've stopped asking for permission. You've stopped waiting for rescue. You've stopped looking for signs. Instead, you've started to move, to speak, to act, even when the voice of fear still echoes in the background. And each time you do, something dies. Not in you, but in the fear. Its authority weakens. Its power fades. That decision, that posture, that internal refusal to crawl is where the transformation begins. Not the kind others see and applaud, but the kind that builds silently, relentlessly, until one day you wake up and realize you are no longer the person who needs to be told to be brave. You just are. Fear doesn't just want to stop you. It wants to redefine you. It wants to convince you that playing small is wisdom, that silence is strength, that waiting is maturity. But Nietzsche warned, the longer you listen, the more your soul begins to rot. Not from pain, from stagnation, from the slow erosion of what you could have been. There is no comfort in unused potential. There is no safety in regret. The fear that kept you from risking today will demand a justification tomorrow. And when you look back, it won't feel like safety. It will feel like loss, not a dramatic one, a quiet, suffocating one. That's how fear wins, not by screaming, but by whispering, by disguising itself as logic, humility, timing. But real timing is always now, not when you're ready, when you're needed. And you are needed the moment you feel the fear trying to stop you. You want to finally confront it? Don't wait for it to vanish. Move anyway. Speak anyway. Write the thing, end the thing, start the thing. Do it while your hands shake. Because trembling action is still action, and it's more powerful than perfect hesitation. Nietzsche's warning wasn't to shame you, it was to wake you up, to remind you that fear unchallenged becomes identity. But fear confronted becomes transformation, one step at a time, one decision at a time, until the person you used to be is unrecognizable, and the fear that once defined you is dead. The fear that kept you small isn't gone. It's just waiting. Waiting for you to flinch. Waiting for you to second-guess yourself. Waiting for you to slip back into that familiar place where it ruled your life without resistance. Nietzsche knew this. He knew fear doesn't vanish. It's confronted, over and over, until it breaks. Not because it's surrendered, but because you outlasted it. Strength isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in the silence after the fear speaks. When you choose to move anyway. When you say what needs to be said. When you do what scares you most. When you stop asking for permission. That's the moment the coward in you starts to die. Most people never reach that moment. They get close. They feel the tension rising. And then they run. They tell themselves the timing's off, that they need more clarity. But what they really need is courage. The raw, imperfect courage to step forward in spite of fear, not in absence of it. Nietzsche's warning wasn't about the pain that fear brings. It was about the decay that avoidance causes. He watched people shrink from life, not because they lacked power, but because they refused to suffer in the name of growth. But suffering isn't the enemy. Numbness is. And every time you let fear dictate your decisions, you choose numbness over vitality. So here's the challenge. Next time fear rises, don't argue with it. Don't justify it. Look it in the eye. Take the step anyway. And when you do, when you confront the thing that's tried to keep you small your entire life, you'll realize something. It was never the world holding you back. It was the story you kept telling yourself about what fear meant. Change that story, and everything changes with it.